Today I'm going to be talking about crunches or sit-ups postpartum. And oftentimes I get a lot of questions about, can I do a sit-up? Can I do a crunch? And wow, I love to not bucket things in yes or no categories because ultimately we're going to have to create that flexion movement through the spine. So yes, ultimately we want to be able to do a sit-up or a crunch, but the biggest thing is we want to really focus on that connection and coordination postpartum. So I wouldn't necessarily start someone off with a full sit-up or full abdominal flexion, but we can train together to manage that pressure through the system and have good control while we're doing flexion. When might this come up? Well, if your kiddo comes in screaming in the middle of the night and you jet up out of bed, you're performing a sit-up in essence. So we want to be able to prepare ourselves for the demands of that movement. So oftentimes in a crunch, what I see in group fitness classes or just in general is that when we're going into that crunch motion, we're kind of not really controlling and taking more of a top-down approach. So you notice a little bit more of that abdominal pooching as I come down, my ribs flare, maybe I even lose contact with the ground with my low back, and I'm going into that crunch, but I'm not necessarily controlling that pressure through the system, and I'm not maintaining that nice stack. So here you can see once again, sort of that pressure down as I go into that crunch. So what we really want to be able to do is manage that pressure, manage that control through the midline and with breath. And that's something that we can work on together. So even just starting in a supine position with a small head lift can be a great way to progress towards that full sit-up variation you might be seeking. So thinking about that inhale and then exhale. From the bottom up, so pelvic floor lifts. Thinking about that exhale traveling like a wave. So pelvic floor lifts, then the hip bones draw together, belly button, ribs knit together on the front side. And as you exhale, you can almost feel like you're kind of coming towards the ground, like those lower ribs are kind of melting into the floor below you. So it's in that position with that level of control with these abdominals that we want to perform that head lift. So we're able to better manage pressure through the system as we come into that more flex position with the spine. Inhale, exhale, and lifting up. If you want to support your head, versus, which is allowing our ribs to kind of flare out. You can see that right through here, kind of arching through that low back and almost that crunching down. Bear with me as I take you for a little ride and we take a more top-down approach. So thinking about just kind of doing that standard crunch, and you can see how kind of creating that bold sensation at the bottom and those flaring of the ribs. Versus we can really focus on that breath. Feeling those low abs and that zipping up from the bottom up. As we go into that head lift. So thinking about more of a bottom up approach with our crunch versus a top down. Inhale. Lower ribs knit together, and then we lift up. So with a crunch, I love to start with little mini head lifts or we can also progress to kind of roll downs, but in a very supported position so we can feel that bottom up exhalation connection to the deep core, feel that the low abs turn on, and sense those ribs kind of back in space as we perform the head lift, versus when we typically see just more of that crunching down without that deep core connection, and that sometimes results in pressuring down, which could lead to some pelvic floor symptoms. So to crunch or not to crunch, I'm going to say that sit-ups and crunches postpartum are not something to fear. We don't put exercises in yes or no categories. I say we can do them all, but we need to have a strategy in place that allows us to do them correctly or just in a better way so we don't experience symptoms and we can progress so we can feel strong and empowered in our bodies. So sit-ups, yay, nay. I say yay, but we really do need to progress them in an appropriate way and get that strategy in place. I also would say that there are plenty of core-based movements that allow us to really connect to our deep abdominals, especially in those early postpartum days, that are perhaps a little bit more priority in some cases than moving to that sit-up or that crunch. Anti-movements like anti-rotation movements, anti-extension, and just really honestly focusing on the breath and connecting with those deep abdominals are great to start with postpartum. But ultimately, I do include sit-ups or flexion type movements for clients. So if you have any questions on sit-ups postpartum and how to progress them and what your belly is doing and how it's responding, then please let me know.